Millbrae Planning Commission meeting of June the 7th. It is video teleconferencing, and per Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order N-2920 and the March 16, 2020 order of the health officer of the San Mateo County directing all individuals living in the county to shelter in their place of residence. The governor has allowed local legislative bodies to hold public meetings via teleconference and to make public meetings accessible telephonically or otherwise electronically to all members of the public seeking to observe and to address the local legislative body or state body to avoid public gatherings, and has suspended all contrary provisions of the Brown Act. This meeting will be via video conference only and can be watched in real time on the Millbrae Community Television Cable Channel 27 or on www.mctv.tv. To maximize time for public comment, members of the public are encouraged to provide comments by joining the Planning Commission via Zoom. For web, please visit https://zoom.us/select-join-a-meeting and enter meeting ID number 812-1285-1606. Please use the raise hand feature to request to speak. For dial-in comments, call 1-669-900-9128. Enter the meeting ID 812-1285-1606 to speak. All public comments are subject to a 3-minute time limit unless otherwise determined by myself. At this moment, I would like to call to order the Millbrae Planning Commission meeting of June the 7th. May we have the roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Wong?
Present.
Commissioner Davis? See. Oops. You're
Maureen,
on mute.
you're on mute.
Commissioner Davis.
I think she was having problem with her audio.
With the sound. Okay. I have a visual. Is that okay? Okay. Vice Chair Joe?
Present.
And Chair Quigg?
Present.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis? Oh, she is having trouble. Okay.
Oh, Maureen is texting me. I can't hear anyone. I'm logging out. She's going to log out and try again. She can't hear anyone. That being said, at this point, can you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the United States
of America, and to the
Republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't know how you did the virtual flag, but I should learn it. Anyway, item number 1 on tonight's meeting is an agenda review. Does anyone have any changes to make the agenda? It's actually a pretty simple one, but any changes? There being none, there are no minutes this evening, so we move into public communication. This is reserved for persons in the audience that wish to make a comment on any item that is related to the Planning Commission, however, not on this agenda. Is there anyone waiting to for public comment? I know. So, Chrissy, is there something that we can do? She can't hear anybody.
And it looks like she already dropped off and logged back in. Guess we can ask
Maybe
her.
if she can call, at least
Yeah, call the
do the
number would be
audio.
better.
I think that's what Commissioner Wong does.
Commissioner Davis, I just sent you the phone number to call in.
She can't
She
hear you,
can't hear.
but
Right, sorry.
Let's see, let me see if I can.
Yeah, I know sometimes on my computer too, I have problems with the audio, so that's why I call in also. It
Right.
seems better voice connection.
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Any other suggestion, Roscoe? Do you think if we ever tried dialing again?
I'll give her a call right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that's trying to get in for public comment? Does you see anybody?
Chair Quigg, I don't see anyone. Is there anyone on the phone?
Okay.
No.
That being said, I think we should wait a few minutes to see if we can get Maureen on. The next item is item number 4. And that's the public meeting for this evening. I think I'll wait a few minutes and see if we can get Maureen on.
I don't think anyone else is having audio problems, right? I can hear everybody fine.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Darcy, Nick and Gabrielle, can you hear us okay? And if you'll try and speak as well so we
Yes,
can hear you.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
I can hear as well.
Thank you.
Maureen, it looks like Maureen's on the phone.
Okay, I can hear Roscoe. He's giving her the number right now, so hopefully she will be joining soon.
If she has it on, she should be able to see your presentation. Is that right?
She might not be able to hear.
Oh, that's right. Is it stormy, windy at everybody's house?
Very.
Okay, it sounds like. Can you hear us, Maureen? Okay.
Commissioner Davis, can we check to see your audio? I'm sorry, your speaker is working? Your microphone? Sorry.
Mine?
Is it working?
Hey, we can hear you, Maureen.
You
So
just
if
need to mute one of yours. Yeah.
So I think it sounds pretty good. We can hear Maureen, and hopefully you can hear us, right? Great. Okay.
Are we good to go? Okay. Item number 4 this evening is a public hearing. And the public hearing this evening is on Millbrae Affordable Housing on-site and in-lieu fee requirements, and affordable housing commercial linkage impact fee zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission will review and make recommendation to the City Council for adoption of an ordinance ending Article 10.05.3300, sequence affordable housing on-site and in lieu fee requirements, and Article Section 10.05.3400, that sequence affordable housing commercial linkage impact fee to Chapter 10.5 of Title 10 of the Millbrae Municipal Code. Darcy Smith will do the presentation, and she is the Community Development Director.
Good evening, Chair Quigg and Vice Chair Joe. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. My name, as you mentioned, is Darcy Smith. I'm the City of Millbrae Community Development Director, and I'll be making the presentation on this item tonight, which is item 4A. Very long title. I'll read an abbreviated one here, but the short title is that these are the city's brand new affordable housing regulations, and they're comprised of amendments to the Millbrae Municipal Code Title 10 that would add the Millbrae affordable housing on-site and in lieu fee requirements and affordable housing commercial linkage impact fee zoning ordinance. And this is a public hearing tonight, so we have a pretty long presentation, and first we'll start with the objective for tonight's item. I'll briefly cover the background of the beginning of this item and why we're here tonight. I'll spend the bulk of the presentation reviewing the draft ordinance that's before you and the associated City Council resolutions. I'll review the technical Nexus studies that were prepared by Harris and Associates. I will cover the public outreach that the city has done on these to educate the community and our developers. I'll end covering the next steps and tonight's action, and we have ample time tonight for questions and answers, as this is the only item on the agenda tonight. The objective of this item is for the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing to review the draft ordinance, to consider the public testimony and the resolution's findings as written, and consider adopting the resolution recommending that the City Council adopt the ordinance. This ordinance would add Article 33, Section 10.05.3300 at sequence affordable housing on-site and in lieu fee requirements, and Article 34, Section 10.05.3400 at sequence affordable housing commercial linkage impact fee to Chapter 10.5 of Title 10 of the Millbrae Municipal Code, also known as the Zoning Code. A quick background summary why we're here tonight. Affordable housing is in high demand in Millbrae. That's both sources wide and far, such as home price listings, rental price listings that are widely available, but also published sources such as the ABAG Jobs Housing Fit Ratio and other sources of information such as the state government that studies these items. Historically, affordable housing that's deed restricted, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, and I'll explain those definitions in a minute. They've only been provided in what was formerly known as the redevelopment project area, which was eliminated about a decade ago, or negotiated on a case-by-case basis as part of development agreements, which you might remember as they've come before you on project-by-project basis in the Millbrae Station Area Specific Plan area. But why we are really here tonight is that the housing element, which was approved in 2015, sets goals and policies for affordable housing, including the policy for the city to adopt an on-site inclusionary requirement in the form of an ordinance, in lieu fees, and commercial linkage impact fees. And I'll cover those exact policies on a slide so you see the background that went into this. I'll summarize how affordable housing is exactly defined, because I think it can mean different things to different people. But as far as we're talking about the laws and what state, federal, and local laws define as affordable housing, those are deed restricted units. So they're special units that are set aside by the builders, either public builders or private builders, and they come with deed restrictions, and they're set to be occupied by specific income groups. And I'll explain those income groups to you in a minute. They're range from extremely low, very low, low, or moderate income. And they have these households that occupy these units have to qualify. They have to go through a very stringent review process where their income is verified, their household size is verified, and then they would qualify. And for most of the units, those that are rental, those are checked every single year. So if they're qualifying for 1 year, they can occupy the house, but if for some reason their income goes up in the following years, then they're no longer qualifying. So affordable housing has set housing prices that are approximately 30% of the gross income household. And that's to be spent on rent or mortgage payment. And that is really all inclusive. So for an ownership affordable housing unit, that does include property taxes, any HOA fees, which actually can be quite high for some of these newer projects, any insurance costs and utilities. And the same for rent, although of course rental units wouldn't include property taxes or HOA fees, but they would include insurance and utilities. And the state has established formulas to set these rents or sales prices for the ownership units for each income category based on bedroom size. And these income limits for each category are defined annually. They were actually just published in April, so I'm going to show you those income limits on the next slide. They're published for the entire county, and then they're adjusted for household size. And those income level categories, the ones I mentioned previously, low, very low, that you'll hear many times tonight, those are defined in the California Health and Safety Code, section 50093, and they're published annually for each household by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And if you want to see those, they're on their website for each county in all of California. And you can imagine we're a big state, so those numbers do range quite dramatically. And as you might guess, San Mateo County is on the very, very, very high range of that. So here are the income levels that I mentioned that were just published in April, hot off the press. And you can see the categories here, and they do have a range, but these are the standardized categories that you see here for very low, low, and moderate. And just to hit some of the numbers here so you understand them a little bit better. So for a very low deed restricted unit, that income category is set at 30 to 50% of what's called the area median income. The area median income is set at 100%. And for example, for 2021, the income limit at approximately about 50% of that, the high range, was about $64,000 for a one-person household. And it grew about $20,000 for a slightly larger three-person household. At the low affordability income category, which is 51 to 80% of that area median income, it's a little bit surprising here, but it surpasses six figures. So for a one-person household, again, at the 80% approximate number of the area median income, it's $102,000. And it jumps about $30,000 for a three-person household in that range. Moderate, which sometimes is sort of mislabeled as a workforce housing, we'll just call it moderate because I think that's the best name for it under the state definitions. That's a wider range of anywhere from 81 to 120% of that area median income. And you'll see these numbers do, again, rise quite dramatically. So for a one-person household at approximately 120%, which is a state number, it's a salary of about $126,000. And then for a three-person household, it jumps up to close to $162,000. And I've only shown you some of the snapshots here. Again, published on the web is a huge table with households from 1, I think, up to 8 or 9, and all those income levels. But this is just important for you to get a snapshot, sort of what numbers we're talking about, because affordable housing can mean different things for different people. But these are the numbers that we're talking about for these units tonight at these categories. It's just important to know how the state defines these and the numbers that we're tasked with using. And again, the state does convey a lot of authority on local governments, such as Millbrae, to set goals and set these laws for affordable housing. So under the state government code, section 65580, the law stipulates that local and state governments have a responsibility to use the powers that are vested in them to facilitate the improvement and development of housing to make adequate provision for the housing needs of all economic segments of the community. So in essence, that means the city must work towards the creation of this housing and also to achieving the state mandated regional housing needs allocation, or the RHNA numbers for its community, which are in the housing element. And I'll go over those now. Those are the goals that the city has set for them for housing production in each of those income categories that I mentioned, the very low, moderate, and then the above moderate category. Above moderate is, again, over 120% of the area median income levels, and that's not considered affordable housing as it's typically not deed restricted and isn't occupied by those incomes. So the housing element policies, which were reviewed by some of you who were on the Planning Commission back in 2015, again, focus on improving the balance of affordable housing in the city at different types and tenures and different affordability levels. But more importantly, that housing element did set the stage for what you're seeing tonight. It called for, under policy HIP-29, this inclusionary housing or on-site ordinance and impact fees, which we'll be discussing tonight. And also the commercial fees that are the subject of the ordinance too. The policy HIP-33 of the housing element calls for studying these commercial linkage fees. And also importantly, and noted that the fee should be set low enough to not discourage new development, which is what the city council provided input on previously. So in conclusion, everything you see tonight started many years ago in the beginning stages, and I'm pleased that tonight we're finally presenting these for you to review. And all what you see tonight, the ordinance and the resolutions implement and are consistent with these adopted policies. I mentioned the regional housing needs allocation, which is again something that Millbrae is provided by the state and by the ABAG, the Association of Area Governments, to plan for housing needs. And I know this is a complicated slide, so I'll just step through it slowly and we can come back to if you have questions. But for the current RHNA cycle that we're in, 2015 to 2023, the city was allocated a total of 663 units. The majority of those, 61%, were identified at that very low, and moderate income level range. So 61% were, the goal was to have those be, again, deed restricted to affordable households. And to date, we frankly haven't been hitting those numbers very successfully. So it's really, I want to plant the seed of why we're doing what we're doing. So for example, the very low affordability income category, the current RHNA cycle identified a need for 193 units. And to date, the city has only issued building permits for 7 units. Similar outcome at the low level, which is a little bit less, only 101 units identified for the RHNA needs, and we've only issued permits for about 6 units. And some of these units are accessory dwelling units, which we are allowed to count towards these income categories because they tend to get lower rents. But they're just slowly trickling in. And at the moderate level, we have a need of about 112, and we've issued a little bit more building permits for that at 26, but we're still behind. Now, we may be able to catch up because the third column here shows the number of approved and permitted units through April. And that total is about 1,008 units. But I want to emphasize that a lot of those units are in TOD1, and that does have a long-term development agreement. And that's the Sarah Station project. And it's unclear when that project will proceed to be issued permits, if it will be in this RHNA cycle. We are, though, catching up ground with the Gateway TOD project. We've issued permits for 400 units that are under construction. And so we will catch up a little bit. But as we look towards the next RENA cycle, and these numbers are still under final review, but look pretty firm, the numbers jump dramatically to 2,199 units identified for the next RENA cycle, which starts in 2023. And the vast majority of those still being identified as deed restricted to very low, and moderate income households, as you see here. So this is really the reason why we're here tonight, why we see this need for affordable housing. And one kind of interesting thing that's mentioned in the Nexus studies is that new construction of market rate housing and also non-residential projects that don't include affordable units, they actually aggravate the existing shortfall of affordable housing demand. Not only do they occupy the land that could have been used for affordable housing, but they create new residents that then purchase goods and services or occupy offices or other businesses in the community, and then create an increased demand for affordable units. Because when they purchase goods and utilize services, that means they're increasing the number of low-wage jobs, and then those low-wage jobs or even mid-range jobs, mid-range wages, create the demand for affordable housing. So it's just important to note that even increasing the supply of market rate housing and then non-residential projects also increases the demand for affordable housing. And that's documented in the Nexus studies. So in conclusion, well, there's a lot of data on this slide. I think it shows that we have a documented need to increase the supply of construction of these affordable units in the city, both right now under our current RENA cycle and looking forward to the next RENA cycle, which will be analyzed further in the next housing element that is underway. So moving along, these proposed regulations that are before you tonight are comprised of three main items. But the first one, the draft ordinance that would add the new chapters to the zoning code, that is the main item for Planning Commission review with action on a recommendation to the City Council. I've mentioned the resolutions. Those are City Council action items. I wanted to cover an overview of those and give you the background for those for your information, but they are only subject to City Council action. And those include the resolution that would adopt the affordable housing requirements and the program regulations, and the resolution that would establish the affordable housing in-lieu fees for residential projects and the commercial linkage impact fees for commercial development projects. So the guiding policy elements for these regulations, as I mentioned previously, is to advance the city's legitimate interest in providing additional affordable housing to all income levels and dispersed throughout the city. This is an ordinance that applies citywide. This ordinance would require the construction of affordable housing with a range of housing types, tenure, and affordability in private development projects. And this would mitigate the effects of new development by requiring these developers to pay in lieu or impact fees or build this on-site affordable housing. The fees would be paid into a newly created affordable housing fund, and that would provide a very valuable funding source to the city to directly fund construction or preservation of affordable units and related programs in Millbrae. And a few folks have asked, well, would the housing be built outside the city, or will these funds be spent outside the city? And absolutely not. This housing would be built in the city to serve our community, and the fees could only be spent on projects inside the city of Millbrae. So I'll briefly cover the ordinances and the resolutions. So the draft affordable housing on-site and in-lieu fee requirement ordinance, that's really kind of the heart of these regulations. That would establish the legal requirements for the provision by private developers of on-site, also referred interchangeably as inclusionary affordable units that are designated as deed restricted. Again, those are legally restricted units. And that's in conjunction with brand new development projects that include 10 or more units. It would establish the requirement for an affordable housing in-lieu fee, and that's assessed on projects with 4 to 9 units, or when the calculation of an affordable units in development projects that are 10 or more result in a fractional unit. And a fractional unit is a unit that's rounded down from 0.5. So it's not an on-site unit, but the city still would want to collect a fee on that unit, that fraction. Next, the ordinance would establish, as I mentioned previously, the Affordable Housing Fund. That's a legally established city fund that would receive all the fees and other funds collected on the ordinance. And last, it wouldn't be an ordinance without a lot of definitions and provisions and processes for the administration, including waivers and enforcement of this ordinance. So the second ordinance, which is the draft Affordable Housing Commercial Linkage Impact Fee Ordinance, that has some other really key features that are very important too. It will establish the requirements for an affordable housing linkage impact fee that's applicable to all new commercial development projects in the city. It defines what those commercial uses are very explicitly. It includes offices, which is not just general offices, but life sciences, R&D uses, other types of offices. It includes hotels, which are also affectionately referred to as motels, inns, et cetera, any sort of short-term rent, transitory use. Next, you have medical uses, so a larger office building, and retail uses and restaurants. It establishes that explicit requirement to pay this impact fee, which is set in the resolution, and it includes definitions, provisions, and processes for the administration, waivers or modifications, alternatives, and then enforcement. So the resolutions, those are really important documents too. So I wanted to mention the highlights of those. They specify the exact percentage of requirements for ownership units and rental units. And the city does have a strong motivator to set different levels because we have different community members who qualify for those units based on their income. And what we've found is that the highest demand and qualifications for ownership units is in the moderate category. They're committing to a pretty big mortgage. There's, as you know, requirements for down payments. And we think this would be optimal to set it at 15% at the moderate category for the ownership units. And then for rental units, again, there's different demands there and different qualifying community members. So the resolution would require that 10% of the total rental units be set aside for very low income categories and 5% be set aside for low. And these numbers do relate back to the RENA numbers. If you remember on that slide, there was a greater proportion identified at roughly 1.75 to 1 of very low income units compared to low income units. So that's the genesis for the split, the 10-5 split. And these are adopted by resolution that gives the city more flexibility to efficiently update them. But what a lot of cities do is they track their progress to the RENA numbers. They also track whether they're getting adequate qualified community members. I know it might shock you that sometimes, we can't find qualified buyers or renters for these units, but the income categories do change over time, and sometimes it's just hard to get someone who exactly qualifies for the unit. But that said, I think these are the right units to start this program out with, because again, this is a brand new requirement, and then the city council would have the flexibility to update them via the resolution in the future. So next, we have the resolution, which includes affordable housing requirements and program regulations. There's a lot of really important items in there, but really important thing to implement the housing element and council policy direction is that the fees in lieu of constructing new units would not be allowed except for those fractional units, which I mentioned. However, consistent with state law, the developer of rental units may request an alternative compliance method that could include a donation of land offsite, again, in the city of Millbrae for affordable housing or offsite construction, or possibly acquisition and rehabilitation of existing units to create new deed restricted affordable units. But that would be subject to city council approval with a project. And in reality, these tend to be quite rare, but the state law does require we provide it. So again, that resolution has a lot of detail. So some other key features are that the affordable units may only be resold to eligible households. That was kind of a miss many decades ago, where affordable units only were affordable for the first buyer. So really important that these restrictions are reapplied and recorded upon each resale. The rental restrictions are in first force for 55 years. That does implement housing element policy. And how is this all enforced? Well, there's a really robust regulatory agreements that are executed upon usually issuance of the building permit with the developer. Or if there's a homeowner buying the unit, then an affordable housing agreement that's also deed restricted. The resolution has a lot more technical details, establishes those affordable housing unit size, types, and design standards. But important to note that it does, one of the most important things when you think of inclusionary units is that they truly are inclusionary. And what that means is that they're distributed in equal proportion throughout the project. For example, they are equal proportion to the bedroom counts within a larger project. And they have interior finishes that are similar to the market rate units, so that you can't really distinguish them from the other units. And that's sort of really the genesis and heart of what it means to be an inclusionary unit. And last, the resolution states that the rents and sales prices are established by council resolution annually. So I've mentioned the fees a lot, and I wanted to show them to you on this slide. They have been reviewed by the city council at their study session, and I'll mention the highlights of that study session soon, but I wanted to show you the fees that were reviewed and supported by the city council. And for hotel uses, it's calculated on a per room basis. But for other uses in the hotel, if the hotel had a restaurant or if the hotel had office space, then that's calculated separately based on those uses. But just for the rooms, the fee would be $3,868 per room. For retail, restaurant, and other uses, the fee would be $5.80 per gross square feet. And those two fees represent the average of peer cities in the county. The Nexus study and the staff report has a table showing those averages, calculations, and what our peer cities are assessing. And last, office uses would have a fee set at $12.86 per square foot. That's set at 35% below the current average. And that's following the council direction as an incentive to attract new office development. And that fee would be just a little bit less than our closest market area, which would include Burlingame, San Bruno, and South San Francisco. And again, the peer cities were presented in the staff report, in the Nexus study, and in attachment 6, which is a survey of the peer cities, just so that you know sort of what other cities are doing, which I think is important to see. So this slide shows example project requirements. So for a 65-unit residential development project, you'll again see the numbers are different here if it's a rental or an ownership project. So for a rental project, the requirements would be 7 very low income units, and that's rounded up from 6.5. And 3 low income units, and that's rounded down from 3.25. But again, I mentioned the fractional fees. And so for the 0.25, there is an $83,000 in-lieu fee assessed. Now, the developer does have the option to provide a 4th on-site low income unit. In working with these over the years, sometimes they do want to round up, sometimes they want to round down and pay the fee. Kind of just depends on the project's pro forma. So for an ownership unit, which would typically in Millbrae's market be a condominium project, that requirement again is 15% or 10 units, all moderate. And here you'll see the math is that it would round up from 9.75. So for the commercial fees, you'll see here on a sample 100,000 square foot office project, the fee is quite substantial in that it's $1.286 million. But again, that office project would have a lot of employees, and they would also create the low wage jobs that this fee is really trying to mitigate the impact of. For an approximately 20,000 square foot retail project, the fee that would be assessed is about $116,000. So you were given the Nexus studies. I know they're extremely technical, so I'll just hit the high points, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have on them. There's 2 Nexus studies. These are required under state law. They're very technical. Lots of detailed calculations were performed. But there's 2 different ones. One is for the affordable housing fees and the inclusionary requirements. And the other Nexus study is for the commercial linkage fees, which are impact fees. So that's a really detailed study that's required. These do document the reasonable relationship between the need for the affordable housing and the impacts of the development described. And they document a reasonable relationship between the use of the affordable housing impact fee and the type of development for which the fee is charged. So that's a really important purpose of these. And there's also an economic feasibility analysis, and that's an analysis of a potential development prototype that concludes that these fees and the on-site requirements are financially feasible based on average development costs and project revenue estimated in the city of Millbrae. The affordable housing economic feasibility analysis conclusion is that for rent projects using multiple unit types are feasible when this 15% inclusionary housing requirements are included, and for sale projects are feasible regardless of unit size when including inclusionary housing requirements. For the commercial linkage impact fee analysis, the retail linkage fees account for approximately 1% of a project's value. It doesn't change the economic feasibility of those projects, and the same for office linkage fees, though those fees are a little bit higher at 2.5% approximately of a project's values, but it doesn't change the feasibility of those projects. And in analyzing these impact fees, we also included our current development impact fees, which were adopted citywide last year and have been in the Millbrae Stationary Specific Plan for some time. And even when this new fee is added onto those fees, again, there's still the economic feasibility of the project. So now I'll briefly summarize the City Council study session that was held on May 11th. They reviewed everything that's in your staff report packet, the ordinance and the resolutions as are presented to you, and they reviewed some key policy items, because as you can imagine, with the breadth of all these regulations, staff focused them in on some really key decisions. Obviously, number 1 was the on-site affordable housing requirements and those specific percentages and income categories that I showed you on a previous slide, and they supported those with no changes at all. Next, they reviewed the affordable housing commercial linkage impact fee, and they supported those with no changes to the fees amounts, which I showed you on the previous slide. They did have a change to the ordinance exemptions. Some cities, our peer cities, did include an exemption for new commercial development of less than 5,000 square feet, and they just recommended to remove that exemption. Next, for the ordinance, it was originally drafted to exempt projects with 4 units or less. That would include a single family home, accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units. And the recommendation from the council was to reduce that from 4 to just 3 units. And that's only for the fractional fee, because the on-site requirement is only for 10 or more unit projects, but they didn't want to lose out on the fractional fee for 4 units. So that fee has been added to the resolution and the Nexus study. And moving on, they also reviewed a very technical aspect of the ordinance, which is the applicability timing for pipeline development projects. The staff recommendation that was presented to council was to have exemptions for active development projects if the planning entitlement application is deemed complete, or if no entitlement is required, which is pretty rare, then if a complete and adequate building permit has been submitted by the ordinance or resolution effective date. And this is only unless otherwise exempt or has vested rights under state laws. And they supported that recommendation with no changes. So that's the text that's presented in the ordinance before you tonight. Next, they reviewed the affordable housing fractional fees, which is in the fee resolution, and they supported that with no changes to the proposed fee amounts. And next, they reviewed the very elaborate affordable housing requirements and program regulations resolutions. And there was one change that they wanted to capture in that, which was to add a provision to require an agreement determining an appropriate number of inclusionary units required or fees for development that is initially approved with 9 or fewer units. And then additional units are approved on the residential development project site within a defined period of time after initial approval. So this might be more difficult in Millbrae, where projects have on-site parking requirements and other requirements that generally define how many units can be built on the site. But regardless, they didn't want someone to come in, they're just under the radar with 9 units, and then later, within a short period of time, add in more units. So this will allow the city to potentially capture those units or negotiate an agreement. But in conclusion, the council did have a lot of support for these regulations, which was positive. So the city has done quite a bit of public outreach and noticing for these regulations. As you see here, we built an informational webpage and we created an interested parties list. We've notified all of our applicants of current development projects under review that these might apply to. We've also notified our major community-based housing organizations that you've probably worked with or heard of in the past, such as HIP Housing, HEART, which is a county organization, and Housing Leadership Group. And we've also talked to them in the development of these regulations. And of course, we posted public hearing notices as required in the municipal code and the government code. And last, I'll cover the next steps. So I know this is a big policy item that's just landed on your laps. But one thing that came out of the city council study session is that they really wanted to get this adopted as quickly as possible. There was even some discussion of having special meetings, but when I analyzed the schedule, I didn't think we could make up that much time. But the city council essentially doesn't want to miss out on any opportunity to gain these units, especially, again, when you look at our progress towards the RENA goals. That I presented on to the city council in April. And after that meeting, I think they were very motivated to move this as fast as possible. So it went to them for the study session May 11th. It's before you tonight on June 7th. And the city council has requested that we tentatively take it to them for introduction of the ordinance on June 22nd, and then adoption of the ordinance on July 13th. And it's very important to note that the regulations don't go into effect immediately, even after that. The ordinance goes into effect 30 days after adoption. So that would be in August. But fee resolutions take 60 days to go into effect. So that would be September 11th when the fees would go into effect. So there's still a pretty long lead time going into these items. And last, I'll end with tonight's action, which is the staff recommendation, which is that the Planning Commission review the draft ordinance, consider public testimony and the resolution findings as presented, and consider adopting resolution, which is attachment 1 of your staff report, recommending the city council adopt the ordinance, which is exhibit A to attachment 1, adding article 33, section 10.05.3300 at SEC, affordable housing on-site and in-lieu fee requirements, and article 34, section 10.05.3400 at SEC, the affordable housing commercial linkage fee impact fee to chapter 10.5 of title 10 of the Millbrae Municipal Code. And that concludes my staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but there was a team that prepared this, so I may not be able to answer all the questions. And in that case, we are grateful tonight to have Gabrielle Johnsons, who's a contract attorney to the city at the firm of Goldfarb and Littman. And we have our Nexus study and economic feasibility consultant, Nick Kroll, who works for Harris and Associates, who's also able to answer any questions on the very technical Nexus studies. So that concludes my staff report. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions and bring up any slides if you want to revisit them.
Thank you. You did a great job. So at this point, do any of the commissioners have any questions regarding this project? I think it might be a good idea to take them one by one. We have done that in the past. Roscoe, what do you prefer?
I think we can go just around the commissioners and then one by one and ask for any questions.
Okay, for each item, ask for questions on that resolution, or in general, ask for questions at first?
I think in general,
Okay.
at first,
Okay, and then as the questions diminish or anything like that, then we'll go through each resolution, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, well, not 6, but some of the other ones. Okay, do I see any commissioners with questions?
I do. So
Commissioner Joe.
thank you through the chair. I guess the first question is more of an overview. I think we only have one resolution that we're approving tonight, right? So I just wanted to be clear on that. So in terms of what we're being asked to do, the other resolutions are city council resolutions that we're not expected to make a comment on. Is that correct? Or I just want to be clear on what is our mission? Or what
That's
are we?
a good question. Are they before us as recommendation to the council, even though they're supposed to make the final decision on it, or not?
Sure, I'll answer that question. Darcy Smith, Community Development Director. So you are correct, Vice Chair Joe, that there's only one resolution before you tonight for action, and that relates to your recommendation on the ordinance, which is a zoning code amendment. The other two resolutions, which are attachments 2 and 3, which are titled draft city council resolutions, those I provided for information purposes only. They are interconnected to the ordinance and provide, a lot of useful information, but the Planning Commission, under your legal roles and responsibilities, has no action on those resolutions.
Perfect, thank you. That being said, it makes it a lot easier for us. So are there any questions from the commissioners?
I do have a few still.
Yes.
On top of that was more the overview. In terms of I just had a question about the so the table where you showed how we are doing on our RENA numbers. You said, so the permitted approved ones, those do include TOD 1 and 2, or is it just one of them? Or because you mentioned something about Sarah Station and you weren't sure it was going to apply to the next RENA cycle.
Yeah, so the permits have all been issued for Gateway at Millbrae Station, which is TOD 2. However, the RENA units that were reported as part of the last annual progress report, which is presented to the City Council in April and then submitted to the State Housing and Community Development Department, those only include permits that are issued through the end of last year. So the 80 units for the Veterans Priority Project, which are 79 affordable units, those permits were just issued in April. So they weren't on the count for our progress, like through the RENA reporting period, which is the end of 2020. But we did issue 79 permits for affordable housing deed restricted that I mentioned in the staff report. The Sarah Station TOD 1, the city has not received any building permits for that project. And it has a long-term development agreement. It was 10 years. It's approved in 2018. So it emphasizes there's many years still on that development agreement. So we tend to think of things in the planning world as, the RENA cycle. So I do not know if those permits will be issued this RENA cycle or if they'll go to the next RENA cycle.
Thank you. And then in terms of, I was just curious as to the fees. I know we're not part of discussing the fees, but just curious as to why we went with the price per room for the hotel room as opposed to, it seems like other cities are doing it per square foot. So just kind of curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm completely happy, and the team is to answer any questions you have on the fees, because I think you should be aware of them since you are reviewing development projects that ultimately, would be assessed these fees if the resolution is adopted in ordinance. The city, when we adopted our impact fees, set those at a per room basis for one. I think there was some discussion back then around the methodology of assessing it per room, which was deemed to be preferable, especially because you might remember when you reviewed the Moxie, for example, that there is kind of a trend towards smaller, they call them micro rooms. So the city didn't want to be a disadvantage since we might, by proximate to our airport location, see more of those micro hotels. It just may be the way the market's going to. So we didn't want to change the assessment by methodology. And it is true that other cities have it on a per square foot basis. So it's a little hard to compare apples to apples, but we did, apples to oranges, but we did calculate it out to get the median, and that's what we set it at. So we can back into that math if you wanted to see it, but.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just curious because everybody else does it by square footage. And then in the ordinance itself, there is some wording about verbiage about a waiver request that a developer could put in for a waiver, and it doesn't say specifically who actually would grant that. Would that be? It just depends on whether the request is being considered by the Planning Commission or the City Council.
Yeah, so it should state that it's subject to the decision-making body. And so that could be the Planning Commission or the City Council.
It just depends on who.
Yeah, it just depends. Yeah, but it's certain. Just to reassure you, it's certainly not staff. It goes to the decision-making body, which is every year the Planning Commission, as part of the project.
Okay, so that's something that could potentially come up before us.
It could. I mean, they're quite rare, as I mentioned in the presentation, but under laws, state level, we need to provide them, and they're important, but in all practicality, they're not that common. And just know if we did get that, we'd thoroughly review it. We'd have our attorneys review it. We'd be very cautious in our review of that to stick to the laws.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is more kind of maybe it's more related to the Nexus study, but in terms of NRVNA numbers, every time they talk about units, doesn't seem like there's a reference to or a differentiation between, say, a studio versus a 2-bedroom versus does it matter in terms of meeting our RVNA numbers and in terms of calculating all of this out? Was there, I'm not sure if I missed it in the study or it's kind of hard to figure it out, but if you have like a 1-bedroom, for instance, and then that might be a 1 person occupying it or 2 people occupying it, how is that accounted for?
Yeah, so a unit is a unit. There's no bonus credit for 4 bedrooms versus a studio.
So for a developer, I guess the reason I'm going to this is that, so for a developer, if they're having to provide a certain number of affordable or low income or whatnot units, I would think that they would try to gear toward the least expensive. So the smaller units so there's no, because that costs less to make, to build, right?
Yeah, but maybe what I think you're asking is about maybe distribution of the sizes. So that there is a requirement in the program resolution that the affordable units, the bedroom counts be in proportion to the market rate bedroom counts. Okay. So usually a project has a distribution of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms for rentals. 3-bedroom rentals are actually quite rare. And let's say it's, I don't know, like 33% studios, 33% 1 bedrooms, and 33% 2 bedrooms. The inclusionary units would be equally required in proportion to those those market rate numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But one important thing that's in the resolution is that there are household sizes for each unit. So for example, a studio can have 1 person, a 1-bedroom unit, can have 2 people, a 2-bedroom unit can have 3 people. So there is kind of there's more of a magic where depending on the number of community members seeking and qualifying for these affordable units, you can kind of have a mismatch. So that's just another thing that we should keep an eye on. There's some cities that have really strong demand by just 1-person households. So those larger units aren't necessarily in demand. And then there's some cities that tend to have a really high demand, for bigger households. It actually can vary. But initially, sort of the best approach is to require equal proportion of units based on bedroom sizes.
And that could be changed in the future because this is done by resolution.
It could be. I mean, if we really found an issue, and I mean, I'm optimistic. We have a huge demand for affordable housing, and we can match. We'll have a big list of interest, and we can match units up based on bedroom size and household sizes, and we'll be able to qualify people. But sometimes it just gets a little bit tricky because you might have a stronger demand for larger units or a stronger demand for smaller units. But I will say in the development community, we are seeing a kind of a robust range of unit sizes. And developers are coming in with studios, 1s, 2s, and 3, but not 3s. 3 bedrooms are kind of rare. So that's the only thing I would mention.
Okay, and is that the same? I mean, so in terms of the bedroom, the unit sizes, or that they should be similar to market rate, makes sense. In terms of the commercial linkage fee, how is that? How can you go a little bit more into like how that is, how that is determined, or what kind of units they're talking?
Well, with that fee, the city just collects the fee payments, much like our impact fees, which the city council adopted those last year. But what will happen with the city's affordable housing fund is that when the city council is presented with the annual budget, which they're being presented with tomorrow night, they'll review the balance in that affordable housing fund, and then they'll review staff recommendations to utilize that fund, or the city could issue, for example, a NOFA, notice of funding availability, and make that available to, for example, affordable housing builders or other nonprofits. The only challenge with that is you kind of need a lot of money, but you might be aware that for the Gateway project, the city did pay out $2.88 million of our historical affordable housing fund. So sometimes we have opportunities to make a funding contribution to housing, and for example, that helped fund the Veterans Priority Project. So when those funding opportunities come up, then the city would, when we build up the affordable housing fund, being an opportunity to expend it. But that decision would be at the city council level as part of the annual budget, or a special budget action mid-year.
That's it for me for now. Thank you.
Do any of the conditioners have other questions? General. Commissioner Davis.
Hi there. Sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about the technical problems. I still don't know what's wrong with my computer. First, this was a fabulous report. thank you, staff and all the consultants and everything else. This is a huge, important thing for the city of Millbury to get in place. So I'm glad it's here in front of us tonight. Kind of going back to one of Jean's questions on the RENA cycle. So it looks like we won't quite meet all of our buckets probably for the current cycle. Will those units we didn't build have to roll over into the next cycle's numbers, or what's the penalty for not meeting those numbers? This is just a curiosity question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Darcy Smith again, Community Development Director. As of now, they don't roll over and there's no penalties. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that there can be serious issues if the city doesn't implement its housing element. So that's why this is really important, because if the city doesn't work towards implementing its housing element and implementing the policies, then there could be repercussions. And probably the most significant is that we wouldn't be eligible for grant funding. So, for example, we've been the lucky recipient of, I think, $310,000 in grants from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which we're using to fund our really important general plan update and our housing element update and the specific plan in the downtown El Camino Real that I know you guys are super excited about. So we really do need to show progress in implementing our current housing element. But as of right now, I would remind everyone the RENA goals are goals, and we have to zone for them, we have to plan for them, we have to adopt policies, but we ultimately can't control the development market. And it's a little volatile right now. And construction prices have gone up astronomically for things like wood and other things. So it's a challenging market, but the most important thing is to do what we're doing tonight, which is policies that are completely within the right of the city, to lay forth, mandates for private development and to collect fees to hopefully, create more affordable housing, which is something that you have the authority to do. The city has the authority to do.
Okay. Just one more. In the report, it talked about both the preservation of affordable housing. How do we have any to preserve? And would we get credit for preserving it? Or is that we need to keep it?
That's a great question. There are some organizations like Heart and Hip Housing who do like to partner with cities, provided we have the funding, to acquire and preserve housing units. However, they don't count towards as brand new housing units because they're existing units. We are creating deed restricted units. That's normally what Heart and Hip would do, is, put in place that deed restriction, which guarantees, again, that they're set aside for specific income category households. So sometimes those organizations come in when, there's units that maybe were below market just by virtue of having a landlord maybe who owned that property for a long time and kept rates kind of lower than the market, and they can acquire those. But those deals are getting harder to do because, well, look at the price of some of those units, right? So you have to have just kind of the right seller and an agency or nonprofit or other community-based organization that wants to buy and then manage those. But those are getting more rare.
Okay, one more. Any clue what kind of money we're talking? You say each year there'll be a budget and the council could just figure out what they want to do with it. And I mean, do you think we'd have a significant amount of money to do bigger things in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? How long will it take to accumulate something chunky?
That's a good question. I think we need some big office developments, and you might know, I mentioned in the staff report, I included a table of the current active development projects. And I think staff has updated you that we do have 2 life science projects, but they're both in the pipeline now. And so they may qualify for the exemption for pipeline projects. But for example, just take one of them, around 200,000, 300,000 square feet, they could be paying in about $3 million. to the fee. So even if one of the projects perhaps qualifies, or if we're able to negotiate a community benefit payment, that could be an option under the Millbrae Stationary Specific Plan, I think for 210 Adrian, which is looking at increasing the floor area ratio above the baseline of the Millbrae Stationary Specific Plan and then triggers community benefits. So if we're able to build up a couple $1 million, I would say that's a good thing to start with, but my best guess is we'll be there in about 2 to 3 years. I mean, we've actually seen quite a bit of development interest, which is why I wanted to publish the list of our projects under review. So you could see there's quite a lot in the pipeline. But the planning division, as our new administrative assistant knows, our phones are really kind of ringing off the hook with people interested in developing a Millbrae, interested in talking to us about different projects. So I'm optimistic that coming out of the pandemic, we'll just see a strong demand and we'll build up this affordable housing fund. And yeah, I mean, some cities have 10, 20, $30 million in their funds, but I think even if we got a couple million, we'd be in a position to do something, as we saw with the Veterans Affordable Housing Project, where we contributed from the city's historical fund 2.88 million. And that really did make the difference in what they call like the gap financing. So the difference between what they can get through federal tax credits, which is a very popular source, and other kind of county and state grants. But it did make a pretty big difference as far as I remember with that project.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Wong, do you have any questions?
Sure. Kind of want to jump into the finances a little bit here. So it's interesting that we're collecting upfront fees for impact fees, and also if they aren't meeting their, housing allotment for the low income categories. So the question is, if we really want to encourage housing developers, whether it's condominiums or rentals, to encourage them to set aside units for lower income, then wouldn't it make more sense to charge annual fees? So say if you have, if they don't meet, if they only have 10 units available for low income, versus what we ask, if 15%, say the number is 15. And then shouldn't we just ask for annual fees to make that difference? So it puts them on a level playing field that it's cost the same, whether we charge them or they make it more available for lower income people. So instead of charging you understand what I'm saying? Why don't we just charge annual? Because they may come back and say, oh, we can pay an impact fee of $80,000 and then we'll have cost recovery in 7 years because that's our break-even point. So we're just going to pay our impact fees. We're not going to bother about making a couple of these units lower income. So why don't we just have ongoing costs for that to make up the difference, so that it encourages them just to put them out as lower income units rather than paying them upfront costs that they can break even in 7 years. Nick, any question for you?
On a rental project, or actually on the for sale projects, they're required to dedicate the units. They don't actually get the choice to opt out. So they can only pay the fee for a fractional unit that's below the 0.5 requirement. So like the 65 unit example Darcy used earlier, if they would be required to dedicate 7 units in a rental project, dedicate 7 units to the very low category, and then 3 units to the low income category, and they just pay a fee for the fractional quarter unit that's not captured by the other units that are going to be deed restricted and deemed affordable.
Okay, so you're saying that they won't have that option to pay impact fees versus.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they can't just pay a fee and get out of it. They have to give the doors. They have to give the units to the affordable housing program.
Okay. And then question about the in-lieu fees, the commercial fees, that's only for new developments, is that correct?
New
These,
development, new
commercial
square
linkage, linkage. It's not for existing buildings to not have to pay that fee. Okay. Seems like, it's very difficult to encourage these developers to meet these RHNA goals. It looks like we're already falling behind in the very low category. That's why we have to make up for that in the future ones where we're asking for 26%. But just even to reality check to meet those goals, say if future developers set aside 15% of very low units, dedicate those units for very low income, we'd be talking about like almost a TOD2 project every year, like 400. We need, like, according to this 10-year plan, 575 units needed over 10 years. That's like 60 units a year. That's 15%. That's like a big, large project every year. So it's very difficult to achieve. Just a comment there. And then why are there higher fees for, the rentals? I would think that, again, the fee should be higher for condominium or cells because the rentals, the building developers won't recoup their costs for several years if they put their units out for rent rather than condominiums that can sell right away and get funds and then pay impact fees. Nick, do you comment on that? The fees are higher for rentals rather than the sales units.
Yeah, the main reason you're going to see on that for the rental is if you look at table, I can tell you the exact table, take a look at, and then I'll answer your question. It's table 11. So if you guys have your packets, hold on, I'm scrolling and I'll let you know the exact page it'll be on. It is table 11 on page 80 of the PDF. It's on page 15 of the Affordable Housing In-Lieu Nexus study if you have that printed out. I'll let everybody give a chance to have it up in front of them. So if you walk through the process, the rental income starts from the same basic point as the mortgage payment, but you see there's other things that are included in a project that's going to be for rental. There's estimations for expenses that are taken in. So you see the household income becomes a monthly rent, then becomes annual rent, then becomes the net operating income. That line, if you read footnote 1, they assume an expense for maintenance and all of the things that go into apartment, management, landscape, all of the things that come into an apartment that manage that, things wouldn't come in if you owned the condo. If your dishwasher breaks, you call your landlord, they replace your dishwasher. Person who owns the unit wouldn't have that option. So there's all those types of expenses that are built in. And probably the larger one is if you read footnote 2, there is a debt service coverage ratio that's required. They automatically create a discount versus what the total rent is to cover things like vacancy and turnover, because even a project that is, has a wait list like all these projects do, especially in the Bay Area, there's still, if a tenant moves out, takes, a week or two to clean the carpets and replace what needs to be replaced and paint the place. So you do lose that rent, and no banks lend against a project at 100% of its income. Whereas a mortgage payment, you can take 100% of that income on day one and assume you're going to get it paid for 30 years. So there's those two discounts that you don't see in a mortgage payment that you do see in a rental project.
Okay. And last question about finances is that, are we sure that these fees, or how do the developers see these fees, and does it at all discourage them from wanting to build in our city? I imagine there's a balance between the fees that we charge. I guess, again, these commercial linkage fees and the other in-lieu fees. Just a question or comment, how will this affect how developers see our city and want to develop in our city?
the two pieces with that, if you read actually section 4 includes the economic feasibility that's already been calculated in there, showing that project with and without the fees is still possible to be built in the city, so they don't discourage. And on a more easy to read sense, if you look at the market survey, pretty much everybody's charging them. So right now you're cheaper than everybody else in the area because you're not charging these fees. Just like, you know, up until about a year ago, you didn't charge any impact fees outside of Millbrae Station. And look at all the projects up and down El Camino that didn't have to pay for their impacts on traffic and water and all the other things that come along with that. So just, it's almost like an accepted piece of a development puzzle as to what your city impacts are going to cost. Is just so in my former life before I worked for on the city side, I was worked with developers. It's just a math equation. You add the additional fees and it just slightly lowers what you can pay for the land or for the existing building there. It doesn't materially change it because either you can buy it or you can't. And it's not a matter of, oh, well, this one fee came in and now the whole project's going to go, you know, belly up. It just isn't how it goes. When they're looking at buying a new project, which obviously exempts the pipeline projects because they've already made their purchases and started their things in place. But for a new developer coming in, it just changes the math equation slightly.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up. That's why the public outreach was very important, to get the information out to the development community, including developers who are looking at land and looking at making options or offers right now. You know, coming out, like I said, coming out of the pandemic, Millbrae is very well positioned to have development interest. But the most important thing, as I've learned, is just make sure people have that information. So we built a website, we've notified our pipeline developers, we're, you know, having a public hearing tonight. Just making sure that the community is aware of these fees, and making sure also that there's notification of when they would go into effect. So you heard me mention previously, you know, we're still a couple months away from these even being in effect, even if we march through with the meetings tentatively scheduled, because fee resolutions actually take 60 days to go into effect. New ordinances take 30 days. And, you know, we launched these to the public in early May. So that gives them a couple months to be aware of it. But this would not make or break a development project. And affordable housing is a social issue, right? I mean, you can't, as they say, open a newspaper or, you know, open your web browser to a common news site without hearing about the importance of affordable housing, and also the role that some major developer and major employers, you know, play in it. A lot of times they'll contribute big amounts to these affordable housing funds or set aside land for construction of affordable housing on really big projects. But it is a community issue. We're all in this together. And I think that there are some developers and landowners on a larger scale who do understand that kind of social responsibility aspect of it.
And one last comment, you know, for this study, it doesn't really say how the money is going to be set aside once these impact fees, in-lieu fees, linkage fees, et cetera, are obtained. Imagine, like you said, that it goes into encouraging and subsidizing more affordable housing. But from a planning point of view, would be good to be able to use some of that or set aside some of that to improve conditions in the neighborhoods or just in general in some of these areas that have these developments. Because if we, you know, put a little bit of investment in and clean up these areas and design them nicely, maybe that will even encourage more development and attract more people, more developers to want to build in our city. So I'm all about on this planning commission, just, you know, looking into the future design and streetscaping and landscaping and beautification so that we could just attract more investment. I'm not sure how that money is going to be set aside. Is that a question for Gabrielle? Is that monies that can be used for that, or does it have to be strictly used for some housing subsidy?
So, Darcy can talk more specifically about how the money will be used exactly, but it should be used for the purpose it was collected, which in this case is for affordable housing. And my conversations with Darcy, I understand that city staff have not yet allocated particular expenses and uses because this fund is brand new and there is no money in it yet. But it should be tied back to the purpose of the impact fee itself.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the impact fees are heavily regulated by state law, by the Mitigation Fee Act. It was once AB 1600, but there's lots of ABs, but that's been a very impact fees are heavily regulated and monitored by the state. We do an annual report to council that I made in January. We have a robust website on our impact fee collection and expenditures. In-Lieu fees are a little bit different, but the same purpose holds true. But yes, they have to be used to increase and improve the supply of affordable housing within the city of Millbrae. I understand your interest in improving the community. And for example, some impact fees could be used to make improvements to capital, facilities, and infrastructure. Those would be the development impact fees. Those are assessed on new development to pay their fair share, not to improve necessarily existing neighborhoods, but to address the impact of new development on the city's capital infrastructure and facilities. And we are collecting those impact fees. As Mr. Crowell pointed out, we put them into effect. We've been collecting them. We've collected them for the MSASP. And so I would invite you to read that impact fee report from January and look forward to the next one. But this affordable housing fee, until we build up, as Commissioner Davis pointed out, a kind of healthy fund balance, it really wouldn't be something that the city council would necessarily look at spending. And the city may be approached, for example, by potential groups. But just for reference, you might have heard of our successful home sharing program through HIP Housing, for example. That's only a $5,000 program. That's not a very expensive program. The bigger expenses are in the multi-million-dollar level, and that's to create new housing. Because as Mr. Krall's study points out, the cost of construction in Millbrae is around $500 a square foot, right, Mr. Krall? Yeah, that's a lot. $500 a square foot. So that means our money, doesn't go that far to the creation of affordable units until we have a pretty sizable fund balance. So what we will do is myself and the Finance and Administrative Services Director will keep an eye on the fund revenue. And when it reaches kind of a decent level, then we'll approach the council and get their input on expending it. But it does have to be used for the creation of affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have just a couple of very simple questions. And in your presentation, you had mentioned that below a market and all the other incomes that they're reviewed annually. So if you have, say, rental units and you review it annually, and it turns out that people make more money that would not qualify them, what happens to them? Do you tell them to leave?
Well, hopefully we don't get to that point. Sometimes you can move them into a different income category. Sometimes if they're at very low, maybe they transition to low, and then they could stay in a different rental unit if it was available, for example. If their income goes up and they're completely out of any qualification that's available, then yes, unfortunately, they do have to move. I mean, they're given notice and they're given time to move. But the thing is, these are deed restricted units only for those qualifying folks or households. And if they don't qualify anymore, because let's say their income went up, then the system works and they're able to afford, more expensive units. Because again, the payments for rents or the ownership costs are based on approximately 30% of their total gross income being spent on housing. So if all of a sudden they're only spending, 20% or 15% because their income went up, well, that's not really how the system's designed to work.
Yeah, I just had never thought about it when you mentioned it, and then all of a sudden I went, whoa, what happened? And also on people that purchase them, does that
So that's different. No. So that they're allowed to stay in that unit, even if their household size changes, even if their income changes, they're allowed to stay in that. But if they do move out eventually, and they do, they might need a bigger unit. Because again, the market in Millbrae is probably going to be geared towards, at least in the foreseeable future, smaller condominium units. So sometimes the families grow and they need more space. And maybe because they've had, a set payment, they can save towards a down payment towards a bigger unit, maybe. And that's what sometimes you'll see with the renters is they're able to, build up their next nest egg if their rents are at 30%, whereas before they weren't able to. But when the unit turns over, if that current occupant does sell their affordable ownership unit, then there's a resale restriction in place that's re-recorded on the property.
Okay, good. And then that means then basically though, that it's 45 years, but then if it resells, then it resets at another 45 years. So basically it's a forever situation. Is that the same? I could remember on the rental units. Does
Rentals are 55 years. That's
reset.
It does not reset
Okay.
after 55 years, but that's generally, so the genesis of that, it's pretty commonly used. If you look at the Pierce surveys in attachment 6, it's mentioned in the housing element. The city has used it because, like I said, we have brought on rental units in the former redevelopment area, and at the Gateway project, there's 100 units under construction that are affordable. It's just a pretty standard period. Buildings do have a lifespan, and rentals too. If there's no sort of motivation for the owner to continually invest, and renovate them, put a bunch of money into renovating them, bringing them up to standards, they do have a finite lifespan.
And help me again, if the developer does not want to provide as many as they're supposed to provide, is that piggybacking on Alan's question? They don't have an option, they have to provide it, and only the fractional amounts you can pay the in-lieu fee for?
That's correct, with the exception of the provisions for alternative compliance methods for rental units. And that's largely based on state law and case law, court cases. But the alternative compliance methods essentially do require the units to be somewhere. They can't just pay the fee. The one option is off-site construction in Millbrae, donation of land. So if someone said, and this again would be pretty rare in a city like Millbrae, but in larger cities it can happen, where they say, hey, I own this piece of land over here, it's an acre. Instead of doing these on-site units, I will donate this land to the city. But again, that's rare. But we do have to have those provisions under state law. But I would emphasize the likelihood of a developer coming in utilizing those is very rare.
Okay, and if they were to choose another location, because I remember this coming up in one of the projects, if they choose to say take that option of another location, would they have to identify that location at the same time as they're moving forward?
Yes, they would. And it would have to be zoned for that use, and they would have to essentially build them concurrently. So again, pretty rare. Yeah. I mean, I'll emphasize the goal of the city, as you saw with, with the RENA documentation, is to get the units. Because as you heard from Mr. Kral, the cost of construction is very expensive. The cost all in, not just our fees, but acquiring the land, building it, operating it, it's very expensive. And so our goal is to get the units, and that's the city. That's really the ability the city has under the laws that are, that are the powers that are vested upon us by the state. And so that's really our best chance at success.
And my last question is, this came up once before, but all of the new ADUs cannot be considered numbers.
They can, yes, they can. And they're right now, I don't know if this will last, but at least currently under our annual report that we file, with the state Housing and Community Development Department, the one I mentioned, we present to the council in April. Under analysis done for that reporting methodology by the county planning group, we are allowed to distribute the accessory dwelling units on different income categories. But I don't know how long that will continue because they aren't deed restricted.
Oh.
They just tend to have lower rents. Not all of them. I mean, we're actually seeing some fairly large ADUs being built in Millbrae, over 750 units and sometimes with 2 bedrooms. And so those rents might be more comparable to, to home rents. But traditionally, the ADUs, at least historically, rented for, less than what you would typically see for, for a single family house or sometimes even apartments.
So the key is the deed restriction.
Yeah, to officially be considered as affordable and to be guaranteed we can count them as arena units for a long period of time, they have to be deed restricted for a pretty long period of time, as we've talked about, 45 years on the resale and 55 years for apartments. Yeah. Because as you've seen over the many years, the market rents can be volatile. They can go up quite dramatically year to year. It can be pretty dramatic rises. So it's hard to count them as affordable if one year they're, maybe they have a very generous landlord who's just going to rent it, for some extra cash. Then a new owner comes in and really wants to charge top of the market. And, sometimes that happens. So rents can be volatile. So unless they're deed restricted and they have all these robust regulations, which I mentioned, there's just no guarantees.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we open for public comment?
Chair, quick, just one.
Yes, Commissioner.
If I may, just one thing. I think you, Chair Quigg was talking about the resale, that it's 45 years. The 45 years doesn't reset, right? If it gets sold. It's just that
it does. Maybe Ms. Jansen's can.
So it gets, the time period gets reset every time it's sold?
That's why
Okay, that's not the way that I read it, as more, it's 45 years and then the deed, that restriction gets reapplied to the new, when the property is transferred. Otherwise, you might as well say forever if you're going to reset to 45 years, every 45 years. So can we have some clarity on that? Because I didn't read it that way. So
Yeah, so I'll pull up the language to read it more specifically, but the intention was that once the property is sold, the 45 years starts over again. And the idea behind that is because you don't want that initial property owner to basically, I guess, use an affordable unit and it turned to market rate. You don't want that big windfall. You want to preserve the affordable unit. So that's the intention, is that once it's sold, it starts over and the 45-year clock starts over. But let me look at the language specifically, but that was the intention.
Yeah, I just can't, I don't know. That almost seems like you might as well say it permanently has to be, that doesn't make sense to me. So that's interesting. I'll just say it that way. Is that, like, Commissioner Davis, is that how you read this? I didn't read it that way, so.
are we?
Yeah, no, I think it's every time it sells within the 45 years, it's still under that rule, but it's an affordable unit for the next 45 years. Right?
That's not what they're saying right now. Is
Yeah,
I know
now
it's
they're
what
saying,
you and I
yeah.
think that.
Okay,
Yes.
but you're understanding it the same way I'm understanding it.
Yes.
The way I read it, it was gonna reset, and that's why I asked the question. Because I thought it was forever too that way. That's why I wanted to clarify it.
Right. So if the property owner were to own the property for, say, 50 years, at that point, the 45-year period has expired and it would go away. And the property would no longer be deed restricted. It's within that 45-year period, if the property is sold, a new 45-year period would begin upon the transfer.
It
And if
would, excuse me, it would make more sense that there would be the balance left. But you're saying it's going to reset at another 45 years. So it basically is forever.
Yeah, and the text, if you want to look at page 5 of the Housing Requirements and Program Regulation, states the duration of such restrictions shall be 45 years and shall be reapplied and recorded upon each resale of the unit. It's probably the best explanation, that it's reapplied and recorded on each resale. And I think there is a logic for that. I mean, when we report these RENA numbers, they're assuming these units are there for a pretty long period of time. And what you don't want to have happen is the windfall, right? Or the win the lottery. So what you don't want to have happen is 45 years, someone, that one lucky buyer, all of a sudden the deed restriction disappears and they would get a pretty significant windfall. I mean, there's a pretty big gap between, the sales price for the affordable units and the sales price for the market rate units. I mean, I've worked on projects where the sales gap, you guys, is about $1 to $2 million. So to have that windfall of, public good is just not appropriate legislation. So typically it is a 45-year that's I'll just say re-recorded and reapplied at any transaction. And I've also seen cases where someone sticks it out, for 45 years. Actually, in the beginning, these were often just 30 years. And people were definitely sticking it out for the 30 years. And then boom, windfall. And then I had a story where someone, the day they hit 30 years, they sold it, pocketed. In that case, it was, over $1 million of just total net equity overnight, and then walked. And the goal here is to build up the public resources for the community, which is affordable housing, not to have one person by, just timing, just get a huge $1 million windfall. Does that make sense? I mean, essentially this is,
but it's just, yeah, I didn't read it that way. So I mean, and I know I'm reading exactly what you're saying. So I'm just saying that I didn't read it that way, and it's kind of interesting.
Well, so this resolution is ultimately included in a much more legally robust affordable housing agreement that attorneys like Ms. Jansen will spend a lot of time preparing. There isn't kind of an industry standard template that developers are used to seeing. It's more rare for like a buyer to see it, but they're typically represented by legal counsel and have go through a mortgage process. So there's a more robust legal agreement that would flesh that out in a lot more detail that's then recorded on the property. And sometimes we negotiate those, but again, kind of boilerplate language in this era, because the vast majority of the cities and counties in the state of California, we have over 500, they have these regulations and they do this, day in and day out. So,
if somebody buys, so say somebody bought an affordable unit and then they kept it for 20, 30 years and their income is fine, they move out, there is no restriction in terms of how much they can charge. They don't need to charge an affordable rate, or is there?
So you're talking about an ownership unit where the owner moves out?
Somebody purchased it at a certain rate. I know they can't sell it. They have to sell it with the same affordability, But is there something that they can actually, after 30 years or 20 or 10 years, if they, they're doing better, they, their income is higher, and so they decide they can move out and buy something. Is there any restriction in terms of their rental? I'm thinking.
Yeah, so they cannot rent. If you have an owner occupied affordable unit, it cannot be rented.
Okay. Okay, so that's one of the restrictions they can't.
Yeah,
Okay.
one of the recorded restrictions. Yeah, they definitely can't move out and rent it to someone else. People try to do it, and we try to catch. We will have to try to catch them to doing that. But they're not allowed to do that. No. Again, that's not the intention of the program.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but the intention and what people do is different.
Yes.
So is that part of the ordinance then, that if you purchase an affordable housing, if there's a sale for affordable housing, that there will be something in the deed that will restrict them to rental at affordable levels eventually?
Well, it would never be a rental. It would only be an ownership unit.
Oh, I mean, so then it restricts them from ever being able
Yes.
to rent it out. So that
Yes.
is in the ordinance. Okay.
Yeah,
Can you?
I think it's in the resolution.
remember seeing it.
I'm having a hard time finding it, but I know it. I know it would definitely be in the recorded agreement. And page 6 of the resolution, it says occupancy restriction. Inclusionary units shall be the principal residence of the owners. Renting, leasing, subleasing, or subletting shall not be permitted for more than 2 months. Page 6 of the Affordable Housing Requirements and Program Regulations Resolution, which is your attachment 2 to the staff report. And there is a enforcement claim that says violation of these occupancy restrictions will be a default under the resale restriction agreement and trigger the city's option to purchase the property. And that would be like the most extreme case where the city would have to come in and purchase it. It has happened in the past. Normally, obviously, we can find qualifying buyers, but if we had to,
If you find them.
we had a major issue with these units and either not being able to find qualifying buyers or with too many bad players, then in some cases the city owns these units. That's very rare.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's no other questions of staff, then I will open up for public hearing. Public hearing is open. Is there anyone in the waiting room that wishes to address this item? No.
Chair Quigg, there's no one at the, no one that chooses to speak on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we will close the public hearing. Is there anyone that ready to make a motion to recommend this to the city council? No motion?
Yes,
Yes.
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution findings as presented and recommend that the city council adopt the ordinance adding Article 33, Section 10.05.3300, affordable housing on site and in lieu fee requirements, and Article 34, Section 10.05.3400, affordable housing commercial linkage impact fees to Chapter 10.5 of Title 10 of the Millbrae Municipal Code.
Second.
Second.
Commissioner Joe has made the second. And if staff can please take the roll call vote for this.
Yes. Commissioner Wong,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Joe,
Yes.
and Chair Quigg.
Yes,
Motion passes 4-0.
once again, I want to thank staff for doing so much work and bringing us up to date. A little bit late, but up to date. So thank you very much. And thank you to Nick from Harris Associates and Gabriella for all of your work. Thank you so much. The next item that actually went pretty smoothly, went pretty well. Anyway, item number 5 is the staff updates.
Yes. So I had mentioned this previously at the last Planning Commission meeting. Just wanted to clarify. So the staff, the Planning Commission chair rotation, we'll have that at the next meeting. I think previously I said the next meeting. I really meant the second meeting, the next meeting after the next. So that will be on the agenda for the June 21st Planning Commission meeting. And on that topic, we will have a meeting on that date. We'll have two design review, single family design review projects and 1 conditional use permit. And lastly, we have received 5 applicants for planning commissioner, and the city council will be interviewing those candidates tomorrow at 5:30. And that's all the updates I have this evening.
Okay. Are there any commission comments?
Yes,
Commissioner
I heard Darcy mention earlier that we are getting a lot of interest and inquiries about developments within the city of Millbrae. I know I can't disclose any specific people, but can you just give us a clue as to what properties are being looked at or inquired about, or what areas and what type of developments, whether commercial or residential type projects?
Well, since this isn't on the, Darcy Smith, Community Development Director, since this isn't on the agenda, I don't think I can mention much. I can highlight our amazing website, which has all of our current projects, and we add them the minute they're submitted. So I'd look at that for a snapshot of what's come in. And we can agendize for a future meeting under a staff item, just an update on development activity, and we can share more.
I see I noticed on the website, there's a large number of El Camino residential developments. Is that going to impact any future El Camino Grand Boulevard design plans or potential for that?
Well, again, this isn't on the agenda, so I don't want to say much, but I could make a follow-up to Mr. Mata's staff announcements, which is that we have the Joint Planning Commission's study session, Planning Commission City Council study session scheduled for Monday, June 28th, early start at 6:00 p.m. via Zoom. And that meeting will focus on just updating the commission and council on the restart of that downtown and El Camino Real specific plan and general plan update to implement the Grand Boulevard. And we've revised the scope to include a more robust streetscape along El Camino Real and Broadway. So you'll be getting having some initial conversations about that streetscape, which has yet to be designed. And ultimately, those plans will probably take the in development phase through the end of this year. So just in short, there's still a lot of work to be done on those documents before they're officially released for public review.
Okay, appreciate that.
Please attend the study session and we'll talk about that more at that exciting meeting.
No other commission comments? Seeing none, we will adjourn the meeting for tonight, which is June 7th. Thank you very much to all of you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.